It was an ugly night for the Royals and Brady Singer. What were our takeaways from game one? We'll dive into them next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and some producing from the day-to-day in the sports world. But when it comes to this podcast, you know that you're going to be getting episodes Monday through Friday, 30-minute episodes, and we're going to continue that all the way into the offseason. So if you can't get enough Royals content, you have come to the right place, because we're always trying to give you, good talking points, good segment ideas, whether you need to vent after a bad loss or you want to feel juiced up or jazzed up after a big-time win. And this year, of course, it has been a fantastic year to do this podcast, and I've really enjoyed it. And even on nights like tonight, where you don't feel as enthused to do an episode, we're still going to have a very fun 30 minutes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, today's show is brought to you by SupplyHouse. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get fast parts. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. So let's dive into it. And I think the overarching story of tonight's game was Brady Singer. It's no secret. I think that everybody knew after tonight's game that he was going to be the focal point of this episode. And really, just the first segment, the headliner segment. And I would like to sit here and pick apart what I thought he did wrong, what I thought was very telling early on in that start. I mean, I could go over the obvious for what Brady Singer brought to the table tonight, but I think we need to take a little bit different of an approach of how we are going to look at Brady Singer, look at his 2024, and what we can and cannot take away when it's all said and done. For starters, this was a bad matchup to begin with. It's not to make an excuse. You would like your pitchers to not have this much of a disadvantage going into a start. But the reality is it was a severe disadvantage because Brady Singer doesn't pitch at any park in baseball worse than he does at Target Field. There is no other park in baseball he pitches worse at than Target Field. So going into this game, he's got an ERA that's near 10. I mean, it's that bad. He's made 5 starts, big enough sample size where those numbers are not just inflated because of one bad outing. It's 5 outings we're talking about, and it's a division rival we're talking about. But after the first inning tonight, I thought that we were going to see at least the competitive, the bulldog Brady Singer, where even if he got knocked around for a few home runs or he gave up a 2-run double with 2 outs, hey, he's getting you through 5 or 6 and he's keeping the tally under 4 runs or less. I mean, after all, he hadn't allowed more than 4 runs in a start since June 11th. We're talking about 2 months. It was that Yankees start at Kauffman Stadium. After that, he had really tightened things up. He had buttoned things up. And going into tonight, I thought the latter would be able to prevail. I looked at the numbers. I tweeted out the numbers going into this start. But I wanted to believe that what we had seen from Brady Singer since that Yankees start was what we were going to see tonight, because we know how big this series was. And though you have Lugo and Reagan's going tomorrow and Wednesday, man, to grab game 1 would have been such a huge advantage for the rest of this series, especially since Boston won, Seattle wasn't playing, so they couldn't lose any ground. It was a bad night to be a Royals fan, because even Cleveland won. They had coughed up a lead to the Cubs, but then found a way to win late. Now you had your chance to jump into second place over the Minnesota Twins. And Brady Singer overall was just not good enough. I don't care that it was 1 inning that he imploded. It was a bad inning. It was a game-deciding inning. And the fact that it happened with 2 outs and nobody on, it makes you sick to your stomach. I mean, the fact that he had The strikeout pitch working, even though he was going sinker, slider, not even going to say the sweeper or anything like that. It was the sinker and the slider, right? And he's getting some ugly swings. He's getting the swing and miss. And I know I just said to begin this show that, I could go over each inning and analyze and say what he did wrong. And then I proceed to do exactly that. What I want to do, though, is say my biggest concern about Brady Singer, but then also put everything into perspective. My biggest issue with Brady Singer this year, as good as he's been, as much of an improvement as he's shown, is that it feels like in starts like this, he just lets one or two things that go against him spiral out of control, right? If you give up 6 runs over 5 innings and it's just a bad night, right? You give up 1 in the first, you give up 2 in the second, you have a clean third, then you give up 2 more in the fourth, so on and so forth. It feels like that's just a bad start. You chalk it up. You just go, you know what? Couldn't really find his best stuff. Wasn't locating well in the zone. Got hit hard. So be it. It's a bad start. It's baseball. It happens. What angers me about this start was that for the other innings he was out there, inning 1, inning 3, inning 4, inning 5, he was good enough. He had 9 strikeouts in this game. Like, that's what's the positive from what you take away. But the overarching thing and what it should be is he gave up 6 runs with nobody out or nobody on and 2 outs. That just can't happen. You can't let a walk to a 7 or 8 hole hitter spiral into 6 runs, right? You have to make that good pitch. You have to get out of that inning. And we have seen a lot of Royals starters thrive with that. You need the big pitch. You locate it well. It doesn't need to be a strikeout. You just have to make that one big pitch to get out of the inning. And then, okay, Willie Castro has the 3-run home run to make it 4-2. At that point, it's a clean slate, start over, get out of that inning. It's still a 2-run game. That is still doable. But then you let it get to Royce Lewis, and Royce Lewis parks one out of the yard. That can't happen, right, from any starter in this rotation. And even Rex Hudler was kind of hinting at that. He was saying he's too good to let things like this happen. And I do believe that to be the case, right? As good as Brady Singer has been this year, those type of innings can't happen regardless of an opponent. It stings worse because it's Minnesota, because this is such a big series. And I get the human element of baseball. It happens. And sometimes there's a team that's a bad matchup for you. There's lefties in that lineup that can crush you. I think there were 3 or 4 guys who were OPSing over 1,000 off Brady coming into tonight. And I'm not going to walk away from it saying, well, Brady Singer sucks. He's never going to be good, because that's not the case. He has been good this year. And I understand that you want him to be great against Minnesota. We all want, or if you're a Royals fan, you want them to be great against these great opponents. And in the second half, there have been these series where they haven't been. But that doesn't make you a bad pitcher, right? I view Brady Singer as a 4-starter. And what his overall numbers are above average for a 4-starter. Is it very frustrating because he only throws 2 pitches for the most part? And when he gets shelled, it just, you go back to that over and over again? Yes. That frustrates you. But I also think he is fine for the rest of the year. His next start will be against, let's see, I think it'll be the Angels, if I'm not mistaken, because it will be Lugo tomorrow, Reagan's on Wednesday. You'll get, it might be against, I think it's against the Reds on Sunday. I was going off the top of my head right there. So I think it'll be against the Reds on Sunday. It's a hitter's ballpark. It'll be another test for him. But I do think that you just have to acknowledge who he is. You have to just tell yourself, this is what can happen to Brady Singer when he has an off night. It's not the starts we see from Seth Lugo or Cole Reagans when he has an off night. Even though Cole gave up, 7 runs. I think it was 6 or 7 runs against the Angels back in Anaheim. Like, it can happen. It's baseball. You don't want them to happen at this point in the season, but they're going to happen from time to time. No, it's not great that the Royals in a series like this laid an egg, but I also don't think they were flat to come out. They led 2-0. And Brady Singer had set down, 5 of the first 6 guys. And his strikeout pitch was working. All things were pointing in a positive direction until they weren't, basically. That's the way I can categorize it. I could say the 2 pitches, harp on that, and his slider was middle. His fastball was just right out over the plate on a couple of those, hard hit balls. I could sit here and do that. What I do think is the issue is he just has to find ways in the future, the rest of the year. That's what I'm eyeballing. I understand if you have an off night and you give up 5-6 runs. But if they're 2 in 1 inning, 3 in 1 inning, 1 in 1 inning, I can live with it, truthfully. I can't live with what I saw with tonight. I can't see 6 runs come in after 2 outs and nobody on. You can't let a 2-out walk spiral into that. I don't care who you are. I don't care who the opponent is. And he knows that, right? I haven't lost all this confidence in Brady Singer. He had been really, really good prior to tonight's start. If you are expecting him to be a 4-pitch pitcher, he's not going to be. Or a 5-pitch pitcher, he's not going to be. If you expect him to carve up everybody, well, he probably would be the frontline guy. He'd be the ace if he was carving up everybody, right? And the Royals would have one of the greatest rotations you've ever seen because of how good Lugo, Waka, and Reagans have been. It was a bad start. You chalk it up. It was a bad outing. I'm not trying to minimize it. Like I said, I can't live with 6 runs after 2 outs and nobody on. You got to have that one pitch to get you out of it. One good pitch in a good spot. Roll them over to third. Roll them over to short. Pop them up. Whatever you need to do. That can't result in 6 runs because that cost them the game tonight. That was when the game ended tonight, was the 6-run second inning. Hopefully Seth Lugo doesn't fall to the same sort of scenario tomorrow. Hopefully he's got his A game because he hasn't had the best numbers over his last 5 to 6 starts. We'll talk about Seth Lugo next and what type of spot he's in for Game 2 up in Minnesota. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to at least one of our sponsors before we kick into segment number 2, and that would be SupplyHouse. Now, with SupplyHouse, you can get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades at SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is a reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. Looking ahead to tomorrow, you've heard me so many times on this show say, what is it about a big moment? What is it about a big moment with a certain player and how it can define them? I think along those lines, I've said that before. When you have a certain player, you put them in a big moment, what is that going to tell you about them? What is that going to define for their season? And I remember it happening in the Cleveland series in Cleveland. I also remember it happening in the Cleveland series in Kansas City. It happened to Cole Reagans in that Boston series. That was another one. And I get that same feel tomorrow for Seth Lugo. Because if the Royals come out tomorrow and don't play well, and they lose to Minnesota, and then Cleveland wins and Boston wins, and no, they didn't relinquish their wild card spot. They still will have a playoff spot with 1 game to go in Minnesota. But tomorrow is big because I think you really need to show Minnesota, of all teams, that you aren't going to be this pushover team, right? This year against Minnesota, the Royals have been bad. They only took 1 in that opening series at Kauffman Stadium, and they took 1 of 4 against Minnesota at Target Field, got beat up early on in a few of those games, and also coughed up Game 4 at Target Field the last time they were in Minnesota, right? And you're going to see the Twins again. And the Twins are going to be one of those teams you simply just have to fare well against if you are to hold on to a playoff spot, because there's too many games against them left. There's too many games against Cleveland left where if you don't play 500 ball or be competitive enough, you are going to find yourself on the outside looking in. And with Minnesota, I agree that it is a bad matchup for this team. I don't think the Royals match up well with Minnesota at all. I think that rotation-wise, the Royals have guys that you can count on, you can trust, but it's a tough lineup to carve up. It's a tough lineup to really hold down for 9 innings. Now, Seth Lugo was able to do it in both starts he had against Minnesota this year. In fact, he has the only win among Royals pitchers at Target Field this year. And tomorrow, he's getting that pressure put back on him, right? I am putting that pressure on Seth Lugo. Now, his numbers have not been great. His ERA has been over 4.2 over his last 4 to 5 starts, right? He's not striking out many guys again. He's had good outings, but we are seeing the Seth Lugo that I think some people out there expected to come back down to earth a little bit. He wasn't going to win a Cy Young. It's still not bad in terms of overall production from a pitcher in the rotation. I'm not there yet with him. But tomorrow you need that Seth Lugo that showed up against the Angels in Anaheim, or against the Tigers in Detroit, or against the White Sox at home. And I get that's an exception because the White Sox are not a great baseball team, though they did win tonight and scored double-digit runs against the New York Yankees, because that's the randomness of baseball. But tomorrow night, it's a really big one for me, even more so than that Game 2 against Boston at Kauffman Stadium. No, I don't think that the season is lost if they lose, or if Seth Lugo doesn't throw well, it's a panic time. None of that. I do believe the Royals just take 1 of 3 from Minnesota. I'm not going to be screaming and crying on Thursday morning. I'm not. Because, as I've said multiple times, if they can tread water the rest of the way, they're going to be playing in October. They don't need to play hair on fire type of baseball where they rattle off 20 and 25. Certainly would be awesome. Wouldn't have to worry about are they in, are they not. But I have always believed that this season is going to come down to the final week for the Royals. And we've seen them do this a few times now, right? Where they lose game 1 and you kind of get down in the dumps a little bit. You feel a little bit dreary about the series. You don't feel confident. And it's always dependent on the opponent. We saw it last week for Boston. We saw it in the St. Louis series, even though it was 1 game. It just puts you in a bad mood. But you also have to factor in that there's 2 more games to go here, and the Royals are going to have the pitching advantage in both of them. Doesn't mean anything in terms of the actual outcome. It's just on paper stuff, right? Seth Lugo is going to face somebody Minnesota has to start in place of Joe Ryan. If Joe Ryan was starting tomorrow, I don't feel good about this series at all. But the Royals have an opportunity to use Seth Lugo in a spot like this, pounce on a starter that's not Pablo Lopez or Bailey Ober or Chris Paddock or Joe Ryan, and find a way to even up this series. And I can guarantee you the pressure falls off your shoulders for game 3. I know the Royals haven't been great in rubber matches, but we all know that feeling we're going to have tomorrow if they don't win. That you look at Wednesday as a dire situation. You got to hold off a sweep against a team that you had an opportunity to leapfrog in the standings prior to coming in. You can't have a sweep. And I still don't think that a sweep is going to happen. Could be wrong. It's baseball. You know, as I said, the White Sox won by a lot of runs tonight against the New York Yankees. So making predictions in baseball is really tough to do. But for me, I think tomorrow night is a excellent spot for Seth Lugo to be in. And it's this playoff feel, right? It's this playoff feel. If the Royals get in to the postseason, Seth Lugo will be in a game like this, right? If Cole Reagans throws game 1, let's say for this hypothetical, he loses game 1. You want Seth Lugo in a spot like this. You want to be able to hand the ball over to him, your 13-game winner, a guy that's pacing for over 200 innings, and say, get it done for us. He did it for the Royals at Target Field last time. He did it against the Twins at Kauffman Stadium to begin the year. He's done it so many times this year. It's a huge spot for him. And he doesn't shy away from moments like this. We've seen it all year long. But man, tomorrow would be quite a time to turn in one of those Seth Lugo quality start beauties. I'm talking 7 innings, 1 run, or if he just gets 6 innings, 3 runs or less, I'll take it. And offense, they got to do their job. And I imagine, since they're not facing Joe Ryan, don't have to worry about that. They'll have a good chance, a good shot to tack on some runs for Seth Lugo early. That needs to be the goal. They did it tonight for Brady Singer, and then Brady Singer imploded. So for me, what is this going to define about Seth Lugo? Because there's going to be moments this year when things wrap up in September, at least the regular season. You hope it doesn't wrap up their season right then and there because you want them to be in October. But the point I was trying to make at the beginning of this segment was that when things wrap up, we are going to look back at certain moments for certain players. Right? Bobby Witt Jr., what did he do in this moment against this team? What did Cole Reagans do against this team in this moment? Salvador Perez, same thing. And now Seth Lugo. What did Seth Lugo do against the Minnesota Twins in Game 2 on August 13th? What did he do? Did he crumble? Did he show up big? Did he give the Royals a chance to go into a rubber match game and jump into second place? We're all going to evaluate things like that when the season is over. Not saying tomorrow's going to define his 2024, but he can put another notch on this milestone year for him if he's able to come up in a big way tomorrow against the Minnesota Twins. All right, before we move on to our final segment, thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, I'm going to tell you who to keep an eye on the rest of the way. If you're into scoreboard watching, you're definitely going to want to tune into this segment. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Before we move on to our final segment, want to give a shout out to a few of our sponsors, starting with Ibotta. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do these have in common? You're probably buying a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibotta and get cash back on all your purchases when you stock up on all your summer essentials. Are you taking that dream vacation this summer but dreading that cost? With Ibotta, you can get cash back on all of your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories this summer and less time dreaming about them. So here's what you need to do. You need to go to Ibotta because they are offering our listeners just $5 for trying Ibotta by using code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or the App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. Also want to give a shout out to FanDuel. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And we've been talking a lot about tomorrow night's game, Seth Lugo, this offense. Maybe look into some of those betting odds. And if you're maybe not the biggest gambler, but you want to get into it, there's no harm in doing it for baseball when football's right around the corner, right? If you want to start winning some money on baseball, you look at some of those hit totals, those run totals. You can just pick who's going to win the game. That's pretty easy to do. If you feel confident in the Royals, might throw some money down on the Royals to win tomorrow against the Minnesota Twins with Seth Lugo on the bump. But just be sure to do so over at FanDuel, one of our proud sponsors here on the Locked On Royals channel. This is a unique time for Royals fans. It's a fun time for a lot of baseball fans when your team's in playoff contention. You're scoreboard watching, right? When you're scoreboard watching, you are living and dying on a Monday night or a Tuesday night with these teams, right? I'm sure tonight you were looking at that Cubs and Guardians game to keep pace in the Central. You were looking at the Red Sox and the Rangers game on ESPN. It's fun, right? It's fun to care about these things. But I think what I've tried to do all season long, this is me personally, not from me spreading the message, and this is maybe what the segment's about, but I really think that all year long, I have stayed consistent with who I'm watching, who I'm eyeballing. In a perfect world, the Royals will catch Cleveland, and Cleveland will get ice cold and limp to the end of the season, and the Royals will catch fire and they'll be magma hot and they'll win the division by a game or two. That's a perfect world, right? I just have never viewed it that way. They're 5 games back after tonight's loss. If it happens, great. But I'm just not feeling that sense of dread when Cleveland wins and the Royals don't, because they've been chasing Cleveland all year. So I kind of cross off Cleveland. I look at the Guardians, and if it gets down to 2 games or 1 game, then yeah, I'm probably living and dying every single night with what the Guardians are doing and what the Royals are doing. But right now, it's 5 games. Still time to catch up, and the Royals have cut things closer than 4 games. They just were this weekend. But still, I don't put winning the division at the top of my desires right now. I got to be realistic, right? So, yes, like I said, in this perfect world, love for the Royals to win the division. But I don't believe it's super realistic at that point. Just go look at some of the odds, the percentages on Baseball Reference and Fangraphs for the Royals to win the division. It ain't very good. You still got to worry about Minnesota as well. So I don't look at them too much. This is going to sound crazy, but I don't necessarily look at Minnesota all the time. And I do want the Royals to leapfrog them over these next 2 games. Feels tough to do after the way they performed tonight, but hey, anything can happen with Lugo and Reagan's on the bump. But I don't look at Minnesota as that team that if they catch fire, it is game over for the Royals. It's not the case for me. There are really 3 teams that I am eyeballing, and really 2 teams at the moment, but 3 teams I'll throw in here. So you could be listening to this and going, how in the world are you not focused on the Twins and the Guardians? I am to an extent, but I look at Boston and I look at Seattle, and those are the 2 teams that I have to worry about, because those are the 2 teams that can keep the Royals out of the playoffs, right? Cleveland and Minnesota could win the rest of their games this year. They could go undefeated the rest of the way, and the Royals could still get in. Now, if they went undefeated, that means they sweep the Royals in some of these games, so maybe not as likely, right? Because there's a lot of different factors in here. But I really do believe that the Central could get 3 teams in the playoffs this year. We've known that for a while. The Royals have held a playoff spot. Same with Minnesota, same with Cleveland. So even if Minnesota and Cleveland play well the rest of the way, the final month and a half of the year, the Royals can get in. If Boston or Seattle plays really well, Seattle could always leapfrog Houston. But then that puts Houston, my 3rd team here, in the wild card contention. The AL West has been back and forth a little bit. I think the Astros win that division. So it really puts the Mariners and Boston as the teams you're watching. I thought after the Rangers series, when I was down there in Arlington, I'd have to keep watch on Texas. They've pretty much fallen out of it at this point. Tampa Bay has kind of fallen out of it at this point. So it's coming down to this 3-team race. And when I'm scoreboard watching, I focus on Boston. I focus on Seattle. If Houston falls into the wild card race, I just swap Seattle and Houston. I start watching Houston a little bit more closely and not so much Seattle, because Seattle, if they win the division, doesn't matter. The Royals can still get in, whether the Houston Astros or the Seattle Mariners win the AL West. It comes down to that final wild card spot. And they have a 2-game lead over Seattle and over Boston. So when I'm watching the Royals play every single night, those are the 2 teams I keep tabs on. Because as long as the Royals win and they lose, that cushion just keeps getting bigger. And that confidence of postseason baseball keeps rising, right? If Minnesota goes on a tear and they sweep the Royals, and Cleveland goes on a tear and they win the division, the Royals can still get in, right? That's why I don't view some of these games just yet as do or die, as must-win games, as you've heard before. Tomorrow's incredibly important. But like we saw on Friday night with St. Louis, if the Royals lose tomorrow and Boston and Seattle lose, no harm, no foul. Yes, you're losing ground on Minnesota. I get that part of it. But also I look at it this way, which is kind of interesting. In the end, the 3rd wild card spot could be a better spot than the 2nd wild card spot. Because right now, the Twins would have to go to New York, a team they have notoriously struggled against in the postseason and really all time. And in fact, I believe the Yankees swept the Twins in both stadiums this year, Yankee Stadium and at Target Field. That's where the Twins would head off to if the postseason began today. The Royals would head to Houston, a team, oddly enough, they've played well against in the last 2 years. They swept them back in April, and last year they swept them at Minute Maid Park and I believe took the series in Kansas City. They've been really good against Houston. There is a world in which that third wild card spot is better, but the Royals can't hang on to that third wild card spot if Boston and Seattle catch fire and the Royals get ice cold. So those are the two teams I'm watching. If you're watching other teams or you're just focused on the Guardians, the Twins, I don't fault you. But to me, the only teams that can prevent, and I mean knock them out, they can't get in, is if Boston or Seattle or Houston, for that matter, get into that third wild card spot. The Twins and Guardians and Royals can all make the playoffs, which this year it's all about just getting your foot in the door for me. I'm not worried about how they get in, who they have to face. They just get in. I'm going to be satisfied with what they accomplished this year. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen to today. Now go check out Locked On MLB Podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to break down just how Seth Lugo did in Game 2 against the Twins. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.